Hey, we're hitting you on a beautiful Thursday today. There's one doc. There's another doc as we get there. I will officially, Steve, I'll say to you, happy first day of summer. It is the first day, gentlemen, of summer, and it already feels like we've gone past the patio weather.
Well, you know what? It seems like we've been in summer mode for a couple of weeks already, and nothing here compared to other parts of the world. It's crazy, but in Eastern Europe, for instance, places like Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, those kinds of places, old, basically old communist countries, they didn't have much air conditioning. And now, it's 108 degrees in some places, 110 degrees. People are dying, and there's no place to escape the heat when it gets like that. And I was talking to some colleagues in Saudi Arabia today, and the temperature there, Steve, is approaching, it can supposedly in the next day or two get to 124 degrees. Wow. Can you believe? It's a little hotter than Southeast Kansas in the summer, I think, but it's getting hot all over and nobody knows why.
Yeah. Well, that's really hot. You and I can remember when I was a smaller child running around. I had a burr knob haircut. I rode my bicycle, and I probably weighed 60 pounds. Being out in the heat, I didn't pay attention to it. Fast forward 70 years, yes, I pay attention to it a lot.
Yeah. Well, I play a lot of tennis and do things outdoors quite a bit. And there's a limit on the heat as to when you can do those things safely, I think. If it gets to be 98, 100 degrees, I'll go swimming instead. I mean, it's hard to do heavy exercise in the middle of the day when it's that hot. I think the crazy thing about what's happening now is that hundreds of people are dying around the world. And here's an example. There were some people who were in Mecca in Saudi Arabia. They were on a pilgrimage, and they were, whether they had water supplies or whatever, maybe not. And they tend to dress relatively heavily anyway, over their head and around their neck and everything else. And supposedly now maybe 100 people may have died on one little march through that area of the country on this religious retreat. And now they're saying 900 people died in 1 week in Saudi Arabia. And I've been there a couple of times, Steve, when it was 110. And, I was always in office buildings and hospitals and places like that. It didn't seem so bad. But people who work outside or people who are just walking around, 110 gets to be super, super hot.
It really does. Yeah.
I have seen the video of people making the pilgrimage to Mecca, and there's a part of the ritual where they walk around and around and around and around with thousands of other people, and there. It does not look like there's any way to avoid the heat or get water to drink or anything like that. I know certain people that I'm associated with, they say, well, I'm not going to drink anything because I'd have to go to the bathroom. We don't want to do that while we're in this line. So I'm sure that that's a major problem.
Well, I think, it's a big problem too, because as you said, there's so many people clustered, and they are doing the pilgrimage. They're just one on top of the other. And there are thousands and thousands of people there at one time. So I hope that they can find some solutions. But, if you say, well, you came all the way to Mecca to do this, now don't take this walk, don't do the pilgrimage. Boy, people are, I think, very reluctant to walk away from that. And there are people who are trying to save their lives now with water and other things after they finish, but I hope that it works out for them. And for the people of Saudi Arabia, you know, most people who are Saudi Arabian citizens have nice homes. They've got air conditioning in their office. They're pretty well taken care of. But the people who are working there, especially guest workers who come in from other countries, they are outside and often 7 days a week out there. And that's got to be really, really difficult. You know, and I've asked them several times, well, what is kind of like what's a temperature that really scares you? And, you know, most people would say 110, yeah, well, we've lived with that always. But when it gets up in the high teens or 120, that's just almost unfathomable how hot that is. You touch something and it will burn you badly. You know, touch a car, ugh, that's not good. I can remember here when we were growing up, there were times in the early 50s, Steve, when we had 106, 107 degrees on our farm. And, you know, we had cattle sometimes die. We had one time, I remember we lost all of our pigs. They were being fattened in a pen. And, you know, they got in a big fight with each other because they were so hot. And, you know, we lost a lot of value there. So, you know, this is a worldwide problem. It's bigger than it's ever been. More heat now, Steve, than it has been recorded in 2,000 years. And it makes everybody a little bit worried about where we're headed. You know, we've had a lot of talk about things we can try to do in this world to decrease our exposure to heat. And, you know, I think it's very hard. You know, fossil fuel use is significant, and our ability to use other forms of energy is relatively small in comparison still.
Yes, I think that well, and the geologists and the anthropologists have said, you know, there have been weather climate changes through eons, and we are surprised at the rapidity of the one we're experiencing right now. And I was expecting Jody to comment on that, and there he is.
You can hear him.
Yeah. And what I was going to say is that the people, if they don't have air conditioning in their own home, they usually can find some place to go where there's air conditioning if it's crazy hot. But in many of these other countries, that is not the case at all, particularly in the Middle East. You know, if you live in a home with 5 cars and you have chauffeurs and everything, yeah, you're going to be fine. But for many other people, they have to be out there to do their work, and it becomes very difficult. So, you know, we wish everybody luck. And in our country, you know, if it's too hot, stay out of the heat. Don't do all the things you ordinarily would do, you know, because it may be a risk to you. You know, I think that as we get through this summer, you know, we're just, today's the first day. Steve, could get worse. I hope it does not, but we have to be prepared for that. And Steve, you don't need to do your afternoon run, you know.
Right.
You can eliminate that one for now.
Hey, water your garden early in the morning or late in the evening.
Yeah. Here's a couple things that I thought were interesting, you know, that have come across my desk in the last day or two. And one of them is coffee drinking. Is it good or bad? Should you drink decaf, or is regular coffee better or as good? You know, I love coffee in the morning, Steve. I like a couple cups of coffee, regular coffee. But there are like 27 million people now who are using decaf, thinking it's better for you. And the question is it really? And is there much taste difference? And is there any benefit of one versus the other? Okay, just to summarize it for a moment, Steve, there are studies that have been done just recently that show whether you drink decaf or regular coffee, there's no difference, but you tend to benefit from coffee drinking generally. Better for your brain health, better for your heart health, gives you more energy. But regular coffee may cause you to have trouble sleeping. Decaf, well, probably doesn't affect your sleeping so much, but there's no great benefit from decaf. What do you like?
Well, I love coffee, and I usually drink regular coffee. Uh, for the last 2 years, I've started drinking coffee again. When I began to start having my arrhythmias and my shocks, I was afraid that the caffeine would trigger my heart, and so I stayed off of all caffeine containing things for a dozen years. It's been quite a while since I've had a shock, so I've gradually gone back to 1 cup of coffee in the morning while I'm sitting out on the back porch listening to the birds. And but used to be when I was working, I'd take my Galichia pitcher and fill it half full of coffee and put 3 ice cubes in it, and that's what I drink. I don't do that anymore, and it's just water now.
Well, I think the bottom line here is that decaf doesn't seem to be better for you significantly than regular coffee. So if you like coffee and you get a benefit from it, more energy, get ready to go in your day, probably is okay. There is one exception, perhaps, and you mentioned it, and that is if you have a heart arrhythmia. Atrial fib is one of those. Extra PVCs. Coffee can make those, regular coffee can make those arrhythmias a little bit worse. They don't always, but it is a certain risk that you have in taking that over a decaf coffee. But I can remember working in the hospital, Steve, and a cup of coffee, make rounds, take the coffee with you. When you're out of that cup, get another one, maybe have 3 cups in the morning sometimes. And, it kind of made the day. It was a good energy source or stimulant to have a cup of regular coffee.
It was a way to make amends and win friends to bring a large can of coffee to the ICU for the girls to make their own coffee, which I would frequently pirate away.
Yeah. Well, here's another one I think is worth talking about, and that is how much TV watching hurts you, how much sitting hurts you, how much decreased exercise. Now, there are certain jobs that people have where you just sit all day long, and you don't move. And with computerization, more and more of those jobs exist. You don't get up and walk around. You don't leave very much. You're just glued in place to your TV or whatever you're using for monitoring and whatever you're using for your job. So, what does it do to you? And here's some statistics. Healthy aging is decreased by TV watching. So you ask yourself, okay, what's too much TV? And these investigators are saying, well, 3 hours a day is too much. But it might be that even less is beneficial to you because watching TV means you're inactive. So for the moment, there you are. You're not moving around. If you work out heavily 2 hours a day, it helps the aging process. If you just do a mild workout, like walking a little bit, or if you have a job, move around a little bit, then you need to do more. You need to do like 3 hours of exercise a day of that kind of exercise. But if you go home and go for a jog or you're going to take a fast walk, then you need only maybe 3 hours, 2 hours a day to improve your aging process. So TV gets a rap here. Computers get beaten up a little bit by these studies, because so many of us today have jobs that mean that you basically sit there and monitor something or do your work from there. How do you feel about that, Steve? Do you see anything like that, people in the world around you?
Well, my wife will say to me, "You sit down and you get stuck in front of that new computer." Well, I get so many spam or emails that I don't know where they came from or things like that, it takes me an hour to go through my email thing to erase, 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 erase. And there may be 6 out of the hour that really are pertinent that I need to. I keep changing email addresses, and but that's a real problem, is the stuff that comes in and ciphering what's important and what isn't. She knows how to solve that. She goes through my email first, deletes everything, and then I don't have to worry about it.
Well, I'm like you. I get an hour's worth of emails at least every morning. So one of the first things I do in the morning is just go through as many of those as I can, and then during the day more. And they're not all throwaways. Some of these are questions that patients I've had in the past, or people who are involved with some new problem and they just want some information, some scientific information. Some of the emails that I get come from abroad, and I feel like most of those I have to answer. Doctors, sometimes patients. So it's easy to say, and I've been encouraged by my family, just get rid of them. Just don't take those. Those are just, you can live without those. But I cannot, and it sounds like you can't either, summarily get rid of all emails. You just can't do it. And if you do, it's going to be something is going to go haywire. You just can't do that. So
with the screen limiting time that you mentioned and television, we just really enjoyed the the World Series of the softball girls, and that was great. Then the boys baseball World Series. We try to enjoy the Royals, but sometimes that's not enjoyable. And we just got done with the NBA and the Celtics winning that one. I'm probably going to have to tune in at the last quarter, or the last 3 innings of a baseball game, the last quarter of a basketball game, the last quarter of a football game, and skip all the rest of it.
Yeah. Well, there's so much to watch on TV. If you like sports, you're right. It kind of goes on and on. You got the French Open tennis tournament. If you like tennis, by the way, there's always a tennis match to watch, and they go on forever. The major tournaments are 5 sets for men, 3 sets for women. And when those get strung out, it can be 4 hours, 5 hours. I just never can watch an entire tennis match. Can't watch an entire baseball game. The NBA, a little bit different. I think that moves more quickly, and it's got some interludes there where you've got a halftime and some timeouts and things. So, but I think people get hung up on that. And watching too much TV isn't good for us for a whole bunch of reasons. The other thing is that intellectually, when you're sitting there, whatever you're watching on TV probably isn't stimulating your brain very much. Even those basketball games that we like, there's not much to think about, especially when the game is over. Did you ever notice that, Steve? You might 2 days later, you might not remember who it was that won.
Yeah.
Unless you have a favorite team in there. Right. If the Royals are playing in the World Series, that's something I would remember that. If the Jayhawks are playing, if K-State's playing, especially K-State football, Jayhawk basketball, those teams are competitive, and I kind of like to watch those. But what about this? Most of the people watching TV for prolonged periods of time are not watching sports. They're watching movies. And now you can pull up a movie from just about anywhere. And I think that, the dangers of overwatching, oversitting, lack of exercise extends also to kids, because a lot of our kids today spend a whole bunch of time with their computer, not getting exercise, not moving around very much, and a lot of time watching TV, and especially their cell phones. So now there's been more emphasis placed on, let's get rid of those cell phones during school. Let's encourage our kids to put that phone away for a while, or maybe not even let them have a phone until they're a certain age. What do you think?
This is 30-year-old information that I used to tell my patients when I was still in practice. And I've been retired 19 years now. But if you have CNN on or Fox News on in the house, and the media hype is breaking news, that it will raise your blood pressure 20 points just by having those programs and that format on your television, even though you're not sitting in front of it watching, because it's all stimulating your adrenal glands and your fight and flight syndrome, because that's how they want to get your attention.
Yeah.
Drama.
I think the other thing that's happened with news, generally speaking, is that it's all tainted one way or the other. It's in favor of one political party versus another. You don't have many Walter Cronkites who would come out and say, these are the most important things that are happening in the world today, without a bias. And even those old time guys on television and radio had biases, but not like we see today. It's either if you watch one network, you're going to get this story. If you watch another one, you're going to get a different story. And yet people develop a lot of loyalty to one channel or another. And I think that prolonged watching of the news, it can go on 24 hours a day. You wake up in the middle of the night, hey, all you got to do is tune in and you can start getting tomorrow's news at midnight or 1 o'clock.
Yeah. What'd you think about Donald Sutherland? Our guy here passes away. Dude was on MASH, starred in Ordinary People with a heavy heart. They said this guy seems like he's been around for ages. But a favorite of you doctors, Mr. Sutherland, as the actor?
Yes, I enjoyed him, particularly on MASH.
On MASH, yeah.
I'll tell you who we lost a couple days ago. Was Willie Mays.
Oh, yeah.
Willie Mays, when I was growing up, Willie Mays was an idol. I mean, he was the best baseball player. He was a runner. He was a great outfielder. He was a great hitter. He stole a lot of bases. And, was somebody you really looked up to as a baseball player. Passed away at the age of 93. Gee whiz.
Yeah.
And he looked pretty good. He looked like he was still with it and doing interviews and things at least a couple of years ago. But as time goes by, many of these old athletes pass away, and he was just one of the greats.
Yeah.
One of the things about Willie Mays is there was not the media pointing out that he was not a white man, that he was black. They really did not discuss race when they're talking about the baseball players who were our heroes when we were teenagers.
Yeah, for sure. I think he was the 7th African-American to play in the major leagues, and what a player he was, and what a person he was. He was always pretty kind to people around him and supportive of his teammates and others. And I always loved watching him. But you remember this, back in the 50s and the early 60s, there wasn't much baseball on TV. To get to see a big time game with the Giants where he was playing, it was pretty tough to do. You had to search around, and you might not see a game with him in it for a long time. But what a player, what a guy. And I think
it would be the World Series on the little screen.
Yeah, that's
black and white.
But I think that players like him and Jackie Robinson and many of those early players paved the way for African Americans in sport in general, and he was one. And I've always admired him for that. Here's another thing: gray hair. There's a question that came to us: why does my hair get gray and I'm only 37 years old? Well, we don't always know the answer to that, Steve. Gray hair tends to be related to aging, but there are people who gray at a certain age and people who live a long time and don't get gray hair. You rarely see somebody in their 80s or 90s, though, with no gray hair at all. What do you think?
I have no knowledge of hair restoration, hair growth at all.
Well, I can see why, Steve. I mean, hair is no longer an issue for you. But it's an interesting thing because the follicles that our hair, that's what our hairs are about, produce a color, the color that we have on our hair.
Right.
And there are things that affect the grayness of your hair, but mostly it occurs for no reason, no good reason. Sometimes it might be related to nutrition. It might be related to air pollution around you. It might be related to smoking or excess alcohol drinking. It might also be related to stress. And that's one thing that people can focus on a lot of times and say, God, I never had much gray hair, but now I got this job and they're driving me crazy and my hair's turning gray. Or it's a tough enough experience with this family to cause you to have gray hair, So
I had a patient that I operated on as emergency who had a suicide attempt and shot himself in the chest, and I did a pneumonectomy on him. And his father was a patient of mine, and his father had a beautiful head of hair, and within a year, his hair was completely white. And I said, what happened? And he said, well, you were there that night. So the stress of dealing with his son's suicide attempt, he attributed to the dramatic change in his hair.
Yeah. There are instances, Stephen, you've seen this as well, where somebody has come to the ER or somehow become involved in a process that scared them to death or was hugely traumatic to them. And their hair turned pretty much gray within like 24 hours or almost overnight.
White.
So, so stress can definitely play a role. But for most people, older you get, chances are greater that your hair will turn gray. And one of the biggest industries in the world today is dye.
Oh, yeah.
And you know what? If you just look at women in our country, especially, and many of us, hair dye is so common. And I guess another question that people always have is, hey, does dye cause you to lose your hair?
Right.
Does dye screw you up in some other way? Can you get leukemia because you dye your hair? We don't think so in our current environment, but there's always that little concern that you can actually traumatize your hair by dyeing it.
Yeah.
And yet more people dye their hair than ever. And if you look at older women today, I'd say that the vast majority will use some coloring for their hair.
And they do it. They do it. It's big business. I mean, it's a huge business.
It's a multi-billion dollar
really
business. And I would say that most people who use dye do it in a way that it looks good, and I think especially women, they know how to do that, and they can do it themselves, so they don't have to go necessarily and pay for somebody to do it for them. But keeping that younger look, no matter how you can do it, is important.
Steve, we'll get you for Christmas a big old wig. We're gonna get you a big old wig, and so you can join us. And mine's going in gray now. So, final thoughts today,
I'd
Doc?
rather have a cowboy hat.
We could get that too.
We'll get it.
But I mean, final thoughts are: be careful with the heat. Don't sit around and watch TV 24 hours a day, and get some exercise. And we can talk forever about keeping your weight down, not smoking, not drinking too much. Those simple things. Thanks, Steve. We hope all of you.
Thank you. Enjoyed.
Guys. Bye-bye.